Hi, welcome. In this video, I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss the issue of how everything filters through relationally, okay, when it comes to how a dog's decision-making process is influenced and governed at that level. And you can kind of compare it to a kind of like a star collapsing in on itself where not even light escapes. Well, it's the same thing. Apply that to any sort of method or concept you can think of, and that is what's really happening. So, for example, say one of the concepts of just conditioning, where you're doing something over and over again, applying this reward to a physical response, assuming that is what you see is actually represents change through at the physical response level. But here's the thing to understand, okay? This is really important. When people apply certain concepts, you have to look at the person themselves, okay, to be able to discern whether or not that whatever that concept is actually representative of change happening. You cannot look at just the response of the dog that way and make assumptions on at the physical level like that to assume that is representative of a balanced state, okay, or that through that tenet of what you're using, that is going to create anything, okay? Because again, this is where it takes really people to apply some critical thinking here. This is really deep stuff, because again, this is why people, and there is a twist in this, just understand, because if you're not looking at this relationally, then you're not going to see that fork in the road, so to speak, as to whether or not that concept is in fact bringing the dog into the right relationship, whether or not the motives that underpin that concept are aligning properly, okay? And then going further than that, okay, this is the problem here, just so people understand. If you really understand what takes precedence, okay, with how a dog's decision-making process is governed, meaning that once you understand what's really at work, okay, and it's just like watching, say, a magic person on the stage sleight of hand going on, is that, and this is how I would compare this issue to, because it is very tricky. Because again, we rely on what we see. Okay, just understand, we rely on what we see. However, nature doesn't reveal itself that way. Just understand, there's things going on here. There's depth. So therefore, and this is how I would compare the dog training world too. Okay, just understand, because of this issue about, I talk about experience and the ability to see these dynamics, see these things. It would be say a crowd of 300 people watching a magic trick, a person that's really, really good, okay, on the stage. And you can imagine, you've seen tricks like this. There will only be, in that crowd of, say, 300 people, there might be 3 people in that crowd that can actually figure out what's happening. They're not being distracted. They're actually can figure out the trick, actually what the sleight of hand is, or what is happening, because that is really understand that's really a good example as to what's happening here in the dog training world. And you can look at, say, emotion, people's feelings and emotions, as the distraction, when it comes to this ability to see beyond appearances. And so again, when you're looking at this issue of what takes precedence, you can look at things as a primary influencing agent and secondaries. And so conditioning or anything like that, counter conditioning, whatever you want to apply to the concept, are secondary. Okay, primary is relationally through the personality type of the person, how that plays out through nature, through strength and weakness. So therefore, if you really look at, this is where if you really track this and you look at, are good at assessing the personality types of the people involved, you'll see consistent patterns. Okay, you'll put this all together, and you'll start to get what I'm saying. You know, with people that are applying certain concepts and how people think, it's really, really important. But again, this whole issue about using certain concepts, and I don't believe, and so much about this is about the mainstream way of thinking. Honestly, again, getting back to the issue of using certain concepts such as conditioning, once you understand this stuff, you're going to look at certain concepts totally different, and you're going to be very intentional with right out of the starting gate with how you're creating change, how that sets up. And therefore, you'll look at conditioning, because a lot of times when you look at, say, using conditioning, it's an assumption for the most part, okay, through repetition, through rewarding at a response level, okay, make an assumption, well, if you do this thing over and over again and keep applying the concept of reward for something that you want the dog to do, that the likelihood is it's going to happen again. Well, that is true to a certain level, okay, but again, you still have to consider about motives. What are the motives of this happening again? What underpin the motives with that thing happening over and over again? You're still dealing with a relational issue here. If people really think about what I'm saying, it's, for example, and here's the thing that gets me about a lot of this. Honestly, I mean, this is so similar in the human world. It's no different than motives with say, anything, with people, with say, children. You can reward all you want, but, it doesn't mean that the motives are good on, incentivizing. There's problems in that. But people, see, this is the thing. I don't think people really are using common sense here to understand that no matter what the concept is, you have to understand you're dealing with relational animals, with how their mind works. They're not robots. And so a lot of these concepts, they're very abstract, okay? They're very much, almost robotic, okay? There's no depth to them. They're just like, do this and this happens and assume that. I'm not saying assume, but that's what's happening. But that's not it. It's really beyond that. So understand, again, getting back to the main point of this video, whatever you do, everything filters through relationally. And so oftentimes what's happening, trainers who are doing certain things such as service dog training, or whatever training it is, believe it or not, you're doing two things at the same time, but you don't realize you're doing them. You're trying to get a dog to do something for you, but you're still dealing with the motives of the dog. Okay, this is why in training, and you really think about what I'm saying, people wonder why things don't always work out, and it will look great in the training environment, because the state of wanting of the dog is such, is that how nature works with how a dog's mind stays within those parameters in that using influencing agents, is that you're not getting, there's a disconnect between real world and training environment. And so therefore, when people hit the street or go into more distracting areas with these dogs are actually, the motives haven't cleaned up. A lot of times they're in a possessive state, even with a lot of these owners of these service dogs. It's not a good, it's a dysfunctional type of thing happening. It's a devaluation issue you're dealing with. The motives are rotten, and you're wondering why bad things are happening with these dogs, because these dogs are not actually in right relationship with their owners. Because out of the starting gate, these trainers, it's all about their feelings and their emotions, and they're not applying common sense to understand about, you're still dealing with the motives, but they're not seeing dogs like that. They're not even getting this. So anyway, that's just I'll do more videos on this, but really you have to apply critical thinking to this stuff. Understand this is deeper than what people realize, but it all makes sense when you understand the problems in the dog training world, and you start to focus in on this issue of relationally with dealing with motives of dogs, all these concepts that are applied, You have to understand how these things filter through. And so when one person's successful and someone else isn't, it's because of what that represents at that level. So anyway, thanks for watching.